This episode of the Unmatched Style Podcast is sponsored by Sticker Mule.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Unmatched Style Design Podcast. I'm Gene.
I'm Jay.
And today we're going to talk about texture as it relates to website design, using texture. We want to sort of reference a chapter from Jason Beaird's The Principles of Beautiful Web Design book.
This has just been re-released.
Just re-released to the second edition. Particularly chapter 3 where he talks about texture.
Yeah, and in chapter 3 he goes through kind of some of the basic principles of texture, like point, line, shape, kind of pattern, and then he kind of follows it up with a few kind of specific examples of how to bring all those things together. And so what we want to do, he has some examples in his book. What we want to do is look at some of the examples that have recently been on Unmatched Style, and just take a look at those and see how they kind of apply to some of these textural things. And in fact, this is a really good book, by the way. And you've taught this as a basically use it as a textbook.
Yes, I actually use that as
taught
a
web
textbook.
design. Yeah,
it's a very good book.
So it's really good. And a little later on, we're going to have an interview with Jason that we taped a little while ago.
The first thing we want to cover is aged and weathered style textures.
Yeah,
and I think our example here is this Majestic. MajesticMadison.com.
Yeah, and this one I think is really cool because it has this, again, kind of nostalgic, kind of vintage feel. And what it's doing that a lot of it's using type and this kind of screen print kind of texture.
Yeah,
and I think it's really successful way of using texture to evoke a mood and a style. And,
all the fine edges are frayed, sort of like a screen printed thing, and even the background has the speckle breakthrough where the ink breaks through the screen. So let's move on quickly to the next section there he has, where he talks about clean and grainy style textures. We want to look at this one that you pulled up, storytellingcenter.net.
One thing that's cool about this is it's a very structured website. Like everything is kind of just so. There's no rounded corners or anything. There's really sharp, crisp lines. And if there wasn't this subtle bit of kind of clean texture, the grainy texture, it wasn't that subtle bit of that,
it would be extremely boring.
It wouldn't necessarily be boring, but it wouldn't have any of the warmth that it really needs to when you're talking about storytelling. This content.
Particularly, I love that one line that runs sort of. It's like a 2-column site, but I love that line that runs down the middle because it's not really a line. It's more like. Just like a shadow,
like
a fold
or
in the
a
paper.
Crease, or
it almost looks like watercolor there.
Yeah, it's really subtle and it's really well done. I really like this site.
Yeah.
So let's go on to the next one, and what he kind of dubbed the handcrafted scrapbook feel. Yeah. And I think this one really does a good job of evoking that. And a lot of with the scrapbook is kind of the idea of layering things. You're kind of trying to make it look literally like you've layered things. You've taken things from the real world, put them on the website, layer it on top, and it creates depth. And it creates a mood, And what's really great about it though is it has that scrapbook kind of feel, but it's not entirely literal. They've slightly abstracted all of these things. Like you have these leaves. They didn't just scan in a leaf. They kind of
they made one.
They might have started with a scanned in leaf, but it's just enough depth and enough hint towards reality without just kind of having a bunch of just scanned in images. Right. Which sometimes can get a little heavy handed.
Yeah, it can. And they use color really well to sort of, they're working with the textures and the colors together to really build that separation.
Well, it's a lot of colors. They're all basically from nature, but kind of amped up.
Yeah, it's very.
I think it's a great site.
So the next little section he sort of talked through was like whimsical and cartoony. I don't know how that necessarily relates to texture, although using texture in that sort of. And those sort of things, like maybe texturized illustrations and things like that. Yeah,
well, if you look at some of his points about line and pattern and all that kind of stuff, a lot of the things you can bring into when you have this kind of illustrative kind of thing.
Right. And this iPolecat, that's funny.
Well, I guess the company is Polecat.
Yeah. But this site is, I think, a great example of using those illustrations, and the illustrations almost start acting like a form of texture in and of themselves because they just kind of break it up between, the layer of the stuff you read and then the background. The last little coverage here is over minimal designs, which is like, I guess, the absence of texture.
Kind of the lack of texture, but that's can be a texture, right?
It's very zen of you. Sorry.
Anyway, so I think this is really about as simple and minimal as you can get.
Right.
You know, I think it's pretty successful. You know, the lack of or the abundance of white space, you know, really helps it focus on the content.
Absolutely.
You know, so now there are a couple of things that it's almost like I feel like it could be even more minimal. You know,
it could.
Yeah, this thing is kind of some you know, cursor candy. You know, I mean, it doesn't really do anything.
I like that term.
Cursor candy.
Yeah, I like that term.
Yeah. So but you know, I think it's still a very successful site, but I almost would like to see it go full on minimal. You know, like some of the drop shadow and the interaction. I mean, it's like the drop shadow doesn't really need that. You know.
Sure.
So it's like seems like there's a little bit of a struggle between being totally minimal,
right?
You know.
Well, you know,
and wanting to provide a little bit of
yeah,
you know.
it's a minimal flavor.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
it's still really
yeah, I think
really
that's
nice
a really
site.
neat effect that they have with the circles there being like animated as you move around them.
Yeah, it's kind of cool. Yep.
Nice little hook.
Well, you know, go and make sure you pick up Jason Beaird's book. It's a really great. It's a good resource. It's a good, like I said, kind of textbook almost. So check it out.
This is Julia from Unmatched Style, and we'll be looking at the Dribbble profile of Allison Nold today. She only has a few posts on there right now, but she's definitely somebody to follow. I already follow her on Twitter, and she's got a lot of interesting stuff. The first thing that you'll notice about Allison's work is that she's doing some really nice things with color. On the first example, it looks like it's a Ecliptics website. She's drawing your eye around the website with really attention-getting yellow here, and I mean, just the way that she uses it on her call to actions is really nice, and it pops. And you'll see that again in her textures. That's another cool thing she's doing, is posting resources for designers. So she's got a few really fun textures in here that she's worked with. And then one more site design I saw that's using some nice, strong, bold colors to pop everything out. Make sure to sign up for the Unmatched Style newsletter to find more inspirational people to follow.
Hello, I'm Gene, and I'm here with Jason Beaird, author of Principles of Beautiful Web Design, which is a SitePoint title. Also a user experience designer for MailChimp. So thanks for talking with us about your book today.
Thanks for having me over.
Awesome. Well, I use your book in a class I teach in 101 and 201, and it's a great book for people who aren't necessarily seasoned graphic designers, interface designers. But why did you write the book? I mean, did you really think about that in particular?
No, I mean, I wrote the book for developers, and when the first edition came out, when I was working on the first edition, I was writing it towards web developers who are maybe been building websites for a while, but don't have any kind of design training. And I feel fortunate to have some academic design training, and you know, people that are already building websites, they're not going to go back to school to get design training when they're already building websites. So that was really the target audience for it, was people that already had some technical know-how, but maybe needed some help in the picking colors and picking fonts kind of department.
You have a case study in there that is Southern Savers.
That's my favorite part of the book. The new book is the case study. It was a lot of fun. Yeah.
Right. You know those people, but how did you? I mean, why did you choose them? What makes that case study so special?
Well, I think a lot of the criticism I got for the first edition was the case study, and in my defense, I created the design. The case study, for those who don't have the book, it's basically at the end of each chapter, I sum up the chapter by going through a design step by step through the book. Right. And so for the first edition of the book, I kind of created this fictitious case study about my father-in-law's business that was a website that never happened even, and I was designing it as I was writing. And if you've ever written a book before, the deadlines are crazy, and I was designing it in the middle of the night, and it ended up being pretty mediocre, I thought. And the reviews of the book said the same thing. The book's good, but the case study is pretty weak. And so I knew I wanted the case study to be really strong with this one. And I could have used a project that I'd worked on recently, but I knew the client and the designer on this particular project, and it was in the middle stages. It was still being built when I started working on the second edition. It was like, this is perfect. And so
good timing to
I asked Matthew Smith at Square Die and asked Jenny at Southern Savers, and they both said yes. So.
Right. Yeah, that's actually a really beautiful design to put in there too. It's
really
strong.
It was fun to follow along too. It was, for me, it was like I get to be behind the scenes and see the story, and then I get to tell a story as well. Right. So for those who don't know, the case study of the book is a site called southernsavers.com. It's really a random story. My wife's really into deal hunting and
That's right.
and grocery deals, and we actually started, my wife and I, a site about deals at a particular grocery store.
Mm-hmm.
And then we found out that one of the sites that we really looked up to a lot that did the same stuff was the site that was here in Columbia, South Carolina.
Right next door.
Right, and so we got to be friends with them before our site got a cease and desist order from the grocery store that we were covering only. So we got to be really good friends with the people that run southernsavers.com, and their site was, honestly, it was pretty hideous, and they knew it.
Yeah.
And they wanted me to redesign it, and so I ended up referring them to Matthew Smith
Right.
and Squared Eye. They got along great, and the process went really well, and they came up with a new identity, a new design,
Yeah, it's a beautiful
and
site
a
now.
whole new website.
Absolutely.
And so I basically just followed that whole process of the first initial contacts,
Right.
the identity stuff that Andrew Ramos did a great job on, and just tell the whole story.
Well, again, Site Point book, Principles of Beautiful Web Design. It's a great book, and I think you should all check it out. So thank you.
Thanks, Gene.